Oh, those state airplanes. News 13 uncovered all kinds of abuses of the state aircraft fleet during the Richardson administration. But Governor Susana Martinez vowed they would stop when she took office. However, investigative reporter Larry Barker has discovered that some of Martinez's top staff apparently don't get it.
The 1980s hit show Fantasy Island always began the same way. Everyone looks skyward at an incoming airplane shrouded in mystery. The same mysterious circumstances surround this aircraft, an unmarked white twin-engine turboprop. The date, mid-February. The flight plan, Santa Fe, Las Vegas, Pagosa Springs. The passengers, 4 strangers. The mission, unknown. However, the moment this aircraft took off that day, it would turn into the first blunder of the new Susana Martinez administration. The governor's chief of staff, Keith Gardner, remembers the flight, but he would prefer to forget it.
Hindsight, had we known everything at the time, that request would have been denied by the governor's office.
The plane in question is state-owned. N575 is part of the New Mexico fleet of aircraft operated for the exclusive use of state officials. To understand why the February incident is such a big deal, you have to put state airplanes in context. Last year, our investigation found high-ranking public officials using state planes as their own personal flying taxicabs. Then gubernatorial candidate Susana Martinez turned the high-flying taxpayer-funded airline into a campaign issue. Once elected, one of her first acts was to sell the jet and put the brakes on misuse of state aircraft.
The Gov said, never again. That promise lasted about 7 weeks. In fact, we can pinpoint the date things turned sour, February 23rd.
That's when a film production company from NBC Universal enters the story. Hollywood producers wanted to check out the historic Cumbres and Toltec Railroad as a possible location for an upcoming TV pilot called The Crossing. But on February 23rd, the film crew was in a bind. They were stuck in Las Vegas and needed to get a lift to Chama. What to do? Well, they could rent a car and drive the 173 miles, or they could charter a plane and fly. Jennifer Schwallenberg to the rescue. Jennifer runs the state film office. She suggested the Hollywood movie team could solve their dilemma by simply hitching a ride on a state airplane.
Now, the Martinez administration is very sensitive about misuse of state aircraft, so approval at the highest levels of state government was required. A host of top officials carefully scrutinized details of the proposed flight.
No one raised a red flag. The state transportation director gave the trip a thumbs up. So did 2 cabinet secretaries, 2 top state lawyers were brought into the picture, and even the governor's office put its seal of approval on the film office flight request. Hours later, 2 state pilots flew N575 from Santa Fe to Las Vegas. Film director Peter Horton and 3 assistants hopped aboard, and they were airlifted to Pagosa Springs. The Hollywood crew then rented a car, drove to Chama, checked out the train, then drove back to Pagosa for the return flight to Santa Fe.
Our investigation found the second this plane took to the skies, it violated regulation and policy. State-owned aircraft is for official use only. Authorized passengers must be either elected or appointed government officials. You can't use state aircraft to scout movie locations. Strike 1. Hollywood crew members are not permitted to fly. Strike 2. And then there's a question about cost. Who's going to pick up the tab for the hour-and-a-half flight? Strike 3.
At first, officials told us they approved the TV use of state aircraft because having the Cumbres train featured in a TV pilot would benefit the economy.
The request came in from the film office, which is state employees. The basis of this use was for economic development, the potential of shooting a scene in Chama versus moving that elsewhere.
At the time, I believed that anyone that was helping further the business of the state could be considered an authorized passenger. And it was on that basis that I approved the flight.
Questions were asked by the governor's office. Was this, one, a legal use of state aircraft? And the answer came back, yes, it's a legitimate use. It had been done apparently in the past. The second and very important question to me was, will any taxpayer money be used or subsidized for this flight? And the answer came back, no.
In fact, the improper flight cost taxpayers more than $4,000.
It was signed off by 2 cabinet secretaries and the governor's office. How does that happen?
Well, I take full responsibility for that.
Secretary Ed Burkle runs the General Services Department.
No, it was not an appropriate use of the state aircraft. We allowed unauthorized passengers to fly on that airplane. Back on February 23rd, being 6 weeks into the job, we took a very liberal interpretation of what an authorized passenger was. In retrospect, you're right, with the beauty of 20/20 hindsight, it was inappropriate, and we would not make that same call today.
The TV studio has now reimbursed taxpayers all costs associated with the flight.
To say that mistakes won't be made in the future, we're not perfect. Will every attempt to avoid making another mistake? Absolutely. These are the kind of things that keep people like me up at night.
Larry Barker, KRQE News 13.